a journey through samurai history. Before we begin tonight's gentle journey, take a moment to check that you are subscribed so you will never miss the next story. And if you feel like sharing, write in the comments where in the world you are listening from. It is always comforting and beautiful to see how many paths meet here in this quiet space. In the gentle hours when day softens into night, when lanterns cast their amber glow across paper, screens, we walk together down a path that winds through centuries. This is not a road of conquest or clamor, but one of quiet dignity, where honor moves like mist through bamboo groves. The stones beneath our feet have been worn smooth by countless footsteps, each one carrying stories of service, craft, and contemplation. The air holds a fragrance of incense from distant temples, mingling with the green scent of moss-covered gardens. Here, in this timeless space, we discover not the clash of steel, but the whisper of silk, the careful placement of a tea bowl, the gentle scrape of brush against paper. The samurai we encounter are gardeners of the spirit, tenders of tradition, keepers of a code that valued the cultivation of one's inner landscape as much as skill with the sword. Tonight, we follow the ancient way of bushidō, not as warriors seeking glory, but as pilgrims seeking understanding. Each step takes us deeper into a world where cherry blossoms remind us of life's fleeting beauty, where the sound of rain on temple tiles becomes a meditation, where the careful folding of a kimono carries the same reverence as the polishing of a blade. The hush of the garden gate opens before us, welcoming us into the sanctuary of memory and meaning. In these quiet hours, we learn that true strength often wore the face of gentleness, that wisdom was found not in the heat of battle, but in the cool shadows of contemplation. The greatest victories were won not through force, but through the patient cultivation of character, the daily practice of virtue, the slow transformation of the self into something worthy of the trust others placed in it. As we begin this journey together, let the evening settle around you like a silk shawl. Allow the weight of the day to slip from your shoulders as easily as armor removed after long service. Here in this space, between waking and sleeping, between past and present, we find ourselves on the threshold of understanding, ready to receive the gifts that centuries of quiet wisdom have left for us to discover. In the time before temples cast their shadows long across terrace fields, when Japan was a collection of scattered clans bound more by loyalty than by law, the first seeds of what would become the samurai way were planted in soil still warm from the morning sun. The earliest warriors were not the elaborate figures of later centuries, but farmers who set down their tools when duty called, merchants who traded goods for service, craftsmen whose steady hands were as skilled with bow as with awl. The mist rolled down from mountain peaks each dawn, carrying with it the promise of another day's work, another chance to serve one's Lord with quiet dignity. In those days, a man's worth was measured, not by the gold in his purse or the size of his estate, but by the steadiness of his word, the reliability of his presence when others depended upon him. The watchtowers that dotted the landscape were not monuments to power, but simple structures where ordinary men stood through the long hours of night, keeping watch so that others might sleep in peace. These early clans gathered around natural leaders whose authority came not from birthright alone, but from their ability to inspire trust, to make decisions that served the welfare of all under their protection. When conflict arose between neighboring groups, they were often settled through ritual challenges or negotiations conducted with elaborate courtesy, for even in disagreement, the forms of respect were maintained. The warrior's code was not yet written in formal documents, but it lived in the way a man kept his promises, honored his elders, and treated those weaker than himself with protective kindness. Morning prayers were offered at small shrines built beneath ancient trees, simple structures where incense mingled with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The prayers themselves were not elaborate petitions for victory in battle, but quiet requests for wisdom and judgment, strength to bear, responsibility, courage to do what was right even when it was difficult. Children learned the stories of their ancestors not through grand recitations, but through gentle conversations held while working in the fields, tending horses, or preparing the evening meal. The hush of the garden gate reminds us that even in those distant days, there was an understanding that true power lay not in the ability to dominate others, but in the capacity to govern oneself. The earliest samurai discovered that honor was not something that could be claimed or won, but something that had to be earned through countless small actions, day after day, season after season. When the sun set behind the mountains and the mist began to rise again from the valleys, these men and women knew that they had spent another day in service to something larger than themselves, and that knowledge brought them peace. In time, the scattered threads of tradition would weave themselves into the elaborate tapestry of bushidō. But the essential pattern was already there in those early days, simple and strong as a grain in well. Seasoned wood. The way of the warrior was first and always a way of service. And service, they learned, was its own reward. The way of bushidō emerged like dawn light spreading across still water, not sudden but gradual, illuminating principles that had always existed but had never been given such clear expression. 7 virtues form the foundation of this code, each one a facet of a single jewel, each reflecting and reinforcing the others in an endless cycle of moral refinement. These were not abstract concepts debated in scholarly halls, but living principles that shaped every interaction, every decision, every quiet moment of self-examination. Honesty was the first pillar, as essential as breath itself. A samurai's word was considered absolute, not because of legal consequences for breaking it, but because truthfulness was understood to be the foundation of all human relationships. When a man spoke, others knew they could build their own plans and hopes upon his statements as securely as upon solid stone. This honesty extended beyond speech to encompass the entire presentation of oneself to the world, rejecting pretense, artifice, or any attempt to appear other than what one truly was. Courage manifested not primarily in the dramatic moments of crisis that poets celebrated, but in the daily willingness to do what was right regardless of personal cost. It was the courage to speak truthfully when silence would be easier, to stand with the weak when it would be more comfortable to remain neutral, to maintain one's principles when compromise promised material advantage. This quiet bravery was cultivated through meditation, through the careful study of one's own fears and limitations, through the gradual expansion of one's capacity to act in accordance with conscience rather than convenience. Benevolence flowed naturally from the recognition that all people shared a common humanity, that the strong were obligated to protect and nurture those who depended upon them. This virtue expressed itself in countless small kindnesses, in the patient teaching of skills and wisdom to those who sought to learn, in the provision of aid to those facing hardship through no fault of their own. A true samurai understood that his strength was not his own possession to use as he pleased, but a gift to be employed in service of the greater good. Respect governed every interaction, from the elaborate courtesy shown to equals and superiors to the gentle consideration extended to servants, children, and strangers. This respect was not mere politeness, but a deep recognition of the inherent worth of every person, regardless of their station in life. It manifested in careful attention to the feelings and needs of others, in the willingness to listen before speaking, to consider before acting, to honor the dignity that belonged to all human beings by virtue of their shared humanity. Sincerity demanded that one's actions flow from genuine conviction rather than from calculation or the desire to create a favorable impression. This virtue required constant self-examination, the courage to acknowledge one's own shortcomings, and the commitment to address them through patient effort, rather than clever concealment. A sincere person sought to become worthy of the trust others placed in them, not through performance or manipulation, but through the slow, steady work of character development. Honor was not something that could be claimed or defended through dramatic gestures, but something that accumulated through consistent application of all the other virtues. It was a natural result of a life lived in accordance with principle, the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing that one had done one's best to serve worthy goals. True honor could never be damaged by the words or actions of others, for it resided entirely within the individual who had earned it through their own choices and efforts. Loyalty bound all the other virtues together, providing the stable foundation upon which the entire structure of bushidō rested. This was not blind obedience to any command, but the deep commitment to serve goals and people worthy of devotion. It included the loyalty one owed to one's family, one's lord, one's community, and ultimately to the principles that made civilized life possible. When conflict arose between competing loyalties, the samurai sought to resolve them in a way that honored the deepest obligations while minimizing harm to all concerned. The hush of the garden gate opens onto a path where these 7 virtues walk together in harmony, each strengthening and purifying the others, creating a way of life that honored both the individual and the community, both the present moment and the long arc of generations. In this quiet place, we understand that bushidō was not a burden imposed from without, but a gift freely chosen, a way of transforming the ordinary challenges of daily life into opportunities for spiritual growth and service to others. The forge glowed like a captured star in the pre-dawn darkness, its light casting dancing shadows across the patient face of the swordsmith as he tended the fire with the careful attention of a gardener nurturing precious seedlings. The creation of a blade was never hurried, never forced, but allowed to unfold according to its own natural rhythm. Each step of meditation on the transformation of raw materials into something both beautiful and functional. The steel itself began its journey in distant mountains, where iron was coaxed from the earth through methods passed down through generations of miners who understood that the best metal came not from violent extraction, but from patient cooperation with the natural forces that had been shaping these deposits for countless centuries. The ore was transported to the forge in small quantities, each batch carefully tested and evaluated, for the smith knew that the final blade could be no better than the materials from which it was made. In the quiet hours before the household stirred, the smith would begin the long process of heating and folding the steel, working it with hammer blows that fell in steady rhythm like the beating of a calm heart. Each fold doubled the layers of metal, creating internal structures of incredible complexity and strength. The smith counted not in minutes or hours, but in the number of folds, the color of the heated metal, the sound it made when struck, the way it responded to the gradual shaping that would eventually reveal the blade hidden within the raw material. The process required not only physical skill, but a deep understanding of the temperament of different types of steel, the way various alloys responded to heat and cold, the subtle signs that indicated when the metal was ready for the next stage of its transformation. Master smiths developed an almost mystical relationship with their materials, able to sense through touch and observation what the metal needed, when to apply pressure and when to allow rest, when to heat and when to cool. The folding process alone might take weeks, with the smith working only a few hours each day, allowing both the metal and himself time to rest between sessions. During these intervals, he might tend his garden, practice calligraphy, or sit in meditation, understanding that the creation of a fine blade required not constant effort, but the right effort applied at the right moment. The rhythm of the work became a form of prayer, each hammer blow an offering, each fold a step closer to the revelation of the sword's true nature. When the basic structure of the blade was complete, the long process of shaping began, using progressively finer tools to achieve the precise curves and edges that would give the finished sword its distinctive character. The smith worked with files and whetstones, removing material grain by grain, following the natural lines of force that the folding process had established within the steel. The blade emerged slowly, like a sculpture freed from surrounding stone, its form determined as much by the internal structure of the metal as by the intentions of its creator. The polishing was a separate art entirely, requiring years of apprenticeship to master. The polisher worked a series of increasingly fine stones, each grade revealing new aspects of the blades. Character. The process was not merely cosmetic, but functional, as proper polishing brought out the grain. Structure that gave the steel its strength and resilience. The polisher worked in a state of focus. Meditation. Each stroke of the stone both an act of craftsmanship and a form of spiritual practice. The hush of the garden gate opens onto the understanding that the creation of a blade was never about the production of a weapon, but about the cultivation of patience, precision, and respect for materials and traditions that made such work possible. In the quiet rhythm of hammer on steel, in the careful attention to temperature and timing, in the long hours of polishing that brought forth the hidden beauty within the metal, the swordsmith practiced the same virtues that guided the warrior who would eventually carry the finished blade, understanding that true mastery came not from dominating one's materials, but from joining with them in the creation of something greater than either could achieve. Alone, in the garden where tea was prepared with the same reverence once reserved for sacred rituals, every gesture carried meaning. Every placement of bowl and whisk spoke of centuries of accumulated wisdom about the proper relationship between host and guest, between human beings and the natural world that sustained them. The tea ceremony was never about the consumption of a beverage, but about the creation of a space where time moved differently, where the rushing concerns of daily life could be set aside in favor of a deeper attention to the present moment. The tea room itself was designed to humble those who entered, with a low doorway that required even the highest-ranking guests to bow as they passed through, acknowledging that within this sacred space, all distinctions of rank and wealth were temporarily set aside. The room was small and simple, its beauty lying not in expensive decorations, but in the careful attention, proportion, texture, and the play of light across natural materials. Sliding screens filtered the harsh daylight into a gentle glow that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. The preparation of tea began hours before the guests arrived, with a careful selection of water from a particular spring known for its purity and subtle mineral content. The host would test the water's temperature using not instruments, but the sound it made as it heated, the size and frequency of the bubbles that rose to the surface, the steam that began to curl from the vessel's mouth. Each stage of heating produced its own distinctive sound, from the first gentle whispers through the rolling boil to the moment of perfect readiness, when the water would best receive the powdered tea. The tea itself was ground fresh for each ceremony, the host working the stone mortar with slow, rhythmic movements that gradually transformed the dried leaves into a fine powder of uniform texture. The grinding was itself a meditation, requiring complete attention to the task at hand, awareness of the changing texture and aroma of the tea as it was gradually refined. The powder was stored in special containers that had been seasoned through years of use, their cedar having absorbed the essence of countless previous preparations. When the guests arrived, they were invited to sit in predetermined positions that had been chosen to create the most harmonious arrangement of personalities and energies. The seating was never random, but carefully considered, taking into account not only questions of precedence and courtesy, but also the subtle dynamics between different individuals, the way their presences would either complement or challenge each other in beneficial ways. The actual preparation of tea proceeded in a prescribed sequence of movements that had been refined over generations, each gesture economical and purposeful, containing no wasted motion, no unnecessary display of technical virtuosity. The host whisked the tea with a bamboo implement that had been carved according to ancient specifications, creating a foam that was neither too thick nor too thin, achieving a consistency that would please both the eye and the palate. Between the formal elements of the ceremony, conversation flowed naturally but never carelessly, touching on seasonal changes, recent poetry, the particular beauty of the implements being used, or philosophical questions that could be explored without the need for definitive answers. The talk was like the tea itself, meant to be savored rather than consumed quickly, allowed to develop its own flavor through the gradual interaction of different perspectives and insights. The garden visible through the tea room's windows was designed to change with the seasons, providing a constantly shifting backdrop that reminded participants of the natural cycles of growth, maturity, decline, and renewal that governed all life. In spring, cherry blossom provided a brief explosion of beauty that intensified awareness of life's transience. Summer brought the deep greens of carefully tended moss and fern, creating an atmosphere of cool refuge from the heat. Autumn painted the maples in shades of fire that gradually faded to the spare elegance of winter, when the garden's underlying structure was revealed in its naked beauty. The stones placed throughout the garden were chosen not for their size or obvious beauty, but for their capacity to suggest larger landscapes, to serve as focal points for contemplation, to create subtle relationships with the plants and water features that surrounded them. Each stone was positioned with the same care that a calligrapher applied to the placement of characters on paper, understanding that empty space was as important as the objects that defined it. The hush of the garden gate opens onto the recognition that the tea ceremony was fundamentally about the creation of peace, not as an escape from the complexities of ordinary life, but as a practice that could transform those complexities into opportunities for deeper appreciation and understanding. In the careful attention to each small detail, in the patient observation of seasonal changes, in the quiet conversation that honored both speaking and listening. Participants learned that every moment contained the potential for beauty, every interaction the possibility of mutual enrichment, every ordinary activity the chance to practice the virtues that made life meaningful. The seasons moved through the Japanese landscape like verses in an endless poem, each one bringing its own particular gifts of beauty, challenge, and spiritual instruction. The samurai learned to read this great text of the natural world with the same careful attention they brought to the study of classical literature, understanding that wisdom could be found as readily in the behavior of migrating birds as in the writings of ancient philosophers. Spring arrived with the tentative green of new bamboo shoots pushing through the earth. Their emergence a daily miracle that never lost its capacity to inspire wonder. The cherry blossoms that followed created brief festivals of beauty, their petals falling like snow across temple courtyards and castle grounds, reminding all who witnessed them that the most precious things in life were often the most ephemeral. The samurai composed verses to capture these fleeting moments, understanding that poetry was not merely an aesthetic exercise, but a means of preserving and sharing insights that might otherwise be lost. The classical form of waka, with its carefully structured patterns of syllables and seasonal references, provided a framework within which feelings and observations could be distilled to their essence. A successful poem did not merely describe what the poet had seen or felt, but created a resonance in the reader's mind that allowed them to experience something similar, to participate in the original moment of perception. The composition of such verses required not only technical skill, but emotional honesty, the willingness to examine one's own responses to life's experiences with unflinching clarity. Summer brought its own challenges and gifts, the intense heat that tested endurance and patience, the dramatic storms that reminded humans of their small place in the larger scheme of natural forces. During the rainy season, when the world was wrapped in mist and gentle precipitation, samurai would often retreat to their studies to work on calligraphy or read the classics, understanding that enforced quiet could be as valuable as periods of activity. The sound of rain on roof tiles became a natural accompaniment to contemplation, its steady rhythm conducive to the kind of deep thinking that was impossible during busier times. Autumn was perhaps the most poignant of the seasons, with its spectacular displays of colored foliage, serving as vivid reminders of the beauty that could emerge from processes of change and decline. The maple leaves that covered temple gardens in carpets of red and gold were not mourned for their departure from the tree, but celebrated for their transformation into a different kind of beauty. The harvest season brought its own satisfactions, the tangible results of spring planting and summer cultivation, the security that came from successful cooperation between human effort and natural processes. The development of haiku in later centuries represented a further distillation of seasonal awareness, compressing entire landscapes of feeling into 17 syllables that captured single moments with startling clarity. The master poets learned to trust the reader's capacity to complete the emotional and philosophical implications of these brief verses, understanding that suggestion was often more powerful than explicit statement. A poem about morning frost might carry within it reflections on mortality, solitude, the relationship between beauty and transience, without ever directly addressing these themes. Winter stripped away all but the essential elements of the landscape, revealing the underlying structure, that had been hidden beneath summer's abundance, the snow that covered temple roofs and garden. Stones created a world of simplified beauty, where the play of light and shadow became the primary source of visual interest during the coldest months. Samurai would often engage in the most demanding forms of spiritual practice, using the season's natural austerity as an aid to self-discipline and purification. The cycle of seasons provided a natural curriculum for the development of wisdom, each one offering its own lessons about acceptance, appreciation, and adaptation to changing circumstances. Spring taught the value of new beginnings, of hope tempered by the knowledge that all growth required patience and nurturing. Summer provided instruction in endurance, in finding ways to remain productive and serene, even under difficult conditions. Autumn spoke of the importance of harvesting the fruits of one's labors, of finding beauty in processes of maturation and release. Winter offered the gifts of simplicity, of discovering how much richness could be found in spare and unadorned experience. The hush of the garden gate opens onto the understanding that the natural world was not merely a source of aesthetic pleasure, but a teacher whose lessons were available to anyone willing to observe carefully and reflect deeply on what they observed. Through poetry and seasonal awareness, the samurai learned to participate more fully in the ongoing creation of beauty, to find their own place within the larger patterns that govern all life, to contribute their own small verses to the great poem that was being written by every creature and phenomenon in the natural world. The art of the brush transformed blank paper into landscapes of meaning, each stroke a deliberate choice that could not be undone, each character a small architecture of balanced forces that had to stand alone, while contributing to the larger composition. In the quiet of the morning study, when the household was still deep in sleep, the samurai would prepare ink with the same careful attention that others brought to the preparation of tea, grinding the ink stick against the stone in slow, meditative circles, adding water, drop by drop, until the mixture achieved the proper consistency and depth of color. The paper itself demanded respect, its surface receptive but unforgiving, ready to receive whatever the brush offered, but incapable of concealment or correction. The best paper was made from mulberry bark that had been harvested at the optimal moment, processed through methods that preserved the fibers, strength and absorbency, then formed into sheets that would last for centuries if properly cared for. The texture of the paper influenced every aspect of the calligraphy, from the way the ink flowed from the brush to the subtle variations in line weight that gave each character its distinctive personality. Calligraphy was never mere copying, but a form of interpretation that revealed as much about the scribe as about the text being transcribed. The same poem might be rendered in dozens of different styles, each one emphasizing different aspects of its meaning, each one reflecting the mood, skill, and spiritual development of the person holding the brush, the space in between characters, the variations in ink, density, the subtle tremors or confident sweeps of the brush all contributed to the overall effect, creating a visual music that complemented and enhanced the verbal meaning of the words. The preparation for serious calligraphy began with the cultivation of proper posture and breathing, understanding that the quality of the brushwork depended upon the state of the entire body, not merely the hand that guided the instrument. The calligrapher would sit in formal position, spine straight, but not rigid, feet planted firmly on the floor, shoulders relaxed, breathing deep and slow. The brush was held with a grip that provided control without tension, allowing the natural flow of energy through the arm to express itself in the movement of bristles across paper. Beginning students spent months practicing basic strokes, learning to create lines that were neither too thin nor too thick, too hesitant nor too aggressive, but properly balanced between opposing tendencies. They learned to begin each stroke with confidence, maintain consistent pressure and speed through the middle portion, and end with decisive but not abrupt conclusion. These fundamental techniques had to become automatic before the student could begin to focus on the higher levels of expression that distinguish true artistry from mere technical competence. The great calligraphers developed personal styles that were as distinctive as handwriting, but far more consciously controlled and aesthetically refined. Their work showed not only technical mastery, but also deep understanding of the text they were transcribing, the ability to allow the meaning of the words to influence the visual presentation without becoming merely illustrative. The best calligraphy created a perfect marriage between content and form, each enhancing the other, creating an experience that was both literary and visual, both intellectual and aesthetic. Painting with brush and ink required many of the same fundamental skills as calligraphy, but applied to the representation of the natural world rather than to the transcription of written texts. The painter learned to suggest entire landscapes with a few economical strokes, to capture the essence of a bird or flower without becoming trapped in irrelevant detail, to use empty space as actively and purposefully as areas covered with ink. The goal was never photographic reproduction, but the communication of the artist's spiritual response to the subject, the qualities that made it worthy of artistic attention. The traditional subjects of brush painting carried layers of symbolic meaning that educated viewers could appreciate without explicit explanation. Bamboo represented flexibility and persistence, its ability to bend without breaking serving as a model for human character. Pine trees suggested longevity and steadfastness, their capacity to remain green throughout the winter, making them symbols of unchanging virtue. Birds in flight spoke of freedom and transcendence, while rocks and mountains provided images of stability and endurance. The appreciation of calligraphy and painting required its own form of education, the development of sensitivity to subtle variations in technique and expression that might not be apparent to casual observation. Collectors learned to recognize the work of different masters, to understand the historical development of various styles, to appreciate innovations that preserved essential qualities while adding new dimensions of meaning or beauty. The sharing of artistic works became a form of conversation, a way of communicating insights and appreciations that could not easily be expressed in ordinary speech. The hush of the garden gate opens onto the understanding that brush and ink were tools for the exploration of inner landscapes as much as outer ones, means of discovering and expressing aspects of experience that remained hidden until the act of creation brought them into visible form. Through the patient practice of these arts, the samurai learned to see more clearly, to feel more deeply, and to share their discoveries in forms that could inspire and instruct others for generations to come. The creation of armor and clothing represented a collaboration between master craftsmen and their patrons that extended far beyond simple commerce into realms of artistic expression, spiritual symbolism, and practical protection. Each piece was designed not merely to serve its function, but to embody the values and aesthetic preferences of the person who would wear it, to serve as a form of nonverbal communication about identity, status, and commitment to the principles of bushidō. The process began with the selection of materials, each one chosen for qualities that went beyond mere appearance or cost. The leather used for the foundation of armor plates was treated through processes that had been refined over generations, tanned with vegetable dyes that not only preserved the hide but gave it rich colors that would remain stable for decades of use. The metals were selected for their capacity to hold an edge, resist corrosion, and accept the decorative treatments that would transform functional objects into works of art. The lacquer that protected and beautified both armor and everyday objects required years of apprenticeship to master, its application demanding perfect timing, ideal atmospheric conditions, and an understanding of the complex chemistry involved in the curing process. The lacquerer worked in a specially constructed room where temperature and humidity could be carefully controlled, applying multiple thin coats that build up gradually into surfaces of extraordinary depth and durability. The final result was not merely protective, but luminous, creating surfaces that seemed to glow with inner light. The silk used for the cords that bound armor plates together was produced through processes that honored the silkworms whose sacrifice made the material possible. The worms were raised with careful attention to their dietary needs, housed in structures designed to provide optimal conditions for the production of high-quality cocoons. The spinning and dyeing of the silk required master-level skills, with different techniques employed to achieve various textures, colors, and patterns that would complement the overall design of the finished piece. The assembly of a complete set of armor involved the coordination of multiple specialists, each one contributing expertise that had been developed through years of dedicated practice. The metal worker shaped the plates, the lacquerer applied the protective and decorative coatings, the leather worker prepared the padding and strapping, the silk specialist created the cords and decorative elements, and the master armorer oversaw the entire process, ensuring that all elements worked together to create a coherent whole. The clothing worn beneath and alongside armor required its own forms of specialized knowledge and skill. The kimono was not simply a garment, but a canvas for artistic expression. Its patterns and colors, chosen to reflect seasonal changes, personal taste, and social position. The best fabrics were woven by hand on looms that had been used by the same family for generations, their operators possessing an intuitive understanding of tension, timing, and color interaction that could not be learned from books or formal instruction. The art of dyeing fabric involved not only technical knowledge of mordants, temperatures, and chemical interactions, but also aesthetic sensitivity to the subtle variations in color and pattern that distinguished superior work from merely competent craftsmanship. The master dyers learned to work with natural materials like indigo, madder, and cochineal, understanding how different fibers would accept various dyes, how colors would change over time, how patterns could be created through complex processes of resist dyeing and overprinting. The care and maintenance of these precious objects became a form of spiritual practice, with specific days set aside for the cleaning, airing, and inspection of armor and clothing. This was not merely practical maintenance, but a form of meditation, an opportunity to reflect on the relationship between the physical objects that supported daily life and the inner qualities they were meant to represent and protect. The careful folding of a kimono, the gentle cleaning of armor plates, the proper storage of silk cords, all became expressions of gratitude for the skill and dedication of the craftsmen who had created these beautiful and functional objects. The seasonal rotation of clothing provided another opportunity for mindful attention to the relationship between inner and outer life, with different weights, colors, and patterns chosen to harmonize with natural cycles and personal moods. The transition from winter's somber elegance to spring's delicate optimism, from summer's practical simplicity to autumn's rich complexity, created a rhythm of renewal and change that kept the wearer connected to the larger patterns of natural and social life. The hush of the garden gate opens onto the appreciation of all the unnamed artisans whose patient labor made possible the beauty and functionality that supported the samurai's way of life. In the careful attention to materials, processes, and final quality, in the willingness to spend whatever time was necessary to achieve true excellence, in the understanding that even the most utilitarian objects could and should be made beautiful. These craftsmen practiced the same virtues that guided the warriors who depended upon their skills, creating a seamless integration between spiritual values and material culture that enriched every aspect of daily experience. The castle towns that grew up around the strongholds of powerful lords were communities designed to support not merely military function, but the entire complex of activities that made civilized life possible. These settlements developed their own rhythms and traditions, becoming places where the rigid hierarchies of feudal society were softened by the practical necessities of daily commerce and the natural human tendency toward cooperation and mutual assistance. The markets that formed the commercial heart of these towns were carefully organized according to principles that balance efficiency with fairness, profit with social responsibility. Different types of merchants clustered together in designated areas, creating neighborhoods where specialists could share knowledge, compete for customers, and maintain the quality standards that protected both their own reputations and the welfare of their clients. The rice merchants, cloth dealers, tool makers, and food vendors each developed their own customs and codes of conduct, their own methods for training apprentices and settling disputes. The children who grew up in these communities learned the skills they would need as adults through a combination of formal instruction and practical experience, spending their mornings in schools where they memorized the classical texts and practiced calligraphy, their afternoons helping in family businesses, or playing games that taught cooperation, strategy, and physical coordination. Their play reflected the adult world around them, with elaborate games that mimicked the ceremonies and occupations they observed daily, but transformed through imagination into adventures and competitions that made learning enjoyable. The workshops where craftsmen created the tools, utensils, and decorative objects that supported daily life were themselves schools where traditional knowledge was passed from generation to generation. The sound of hammers on anvils, the scrape of planes across wood, the rhythmic clicking of looms created a symphony of productive activity that provided a constant background to the life of the town. Apprentices learned not only technical skills, but also the ethical standards that govern honest business practices, the importance of pride in one's work, the satisfaction that came from creating objects that would serve their users well for many years. The temples and shrines that served the spiritual needs of the community were integrated into the fabric of daily life, not set apart as remote sanctuaries, but woven into the patterns of ordinary activity. People stopped to make brief prayers on their way to market, brought their children to be blessed during festivals, sought guidance from priests and monks when facing difficult decisions. The religious calendar provided a structure of celebration and observance that gave meaning to the passage of time, marking not only the changing seasons, but also the important transitions in individual and community life. The seasonal festivals brought the entire community together in shared celebration, temporarily suspending the usual distinctions of rank and occupation in favor of common participation in ancient rituals of gratitude and renewal. These events required months of preparation, with different neighborhoods and guilds taking responsibility for various aspects of the celebration. The cooperation necessary to stage these festivals strengthened the bonds between different groups, creating networks of mutual obligation and assistance that supported the community throughout the year. The tea houses and inns that served travelers and locals alike became centers of information exchange, places where news from other regions was shared and evaluated, where business partnerships were formed, where marriages were arranged and friendships deepened. The proprietors of these establishments understood that their role extended far beyond provision of food and shelter to encompass the creation of atmospheres conducive to relaxation, conversation, and the strengthening of social bonds. The evening hours brought their own patterns of activity, with the soft glow of lanterns creating islands of warm light along the streets and alleys. Families gathered for dinner, sharing the events of the day, planning for tomorrow's activities, telling stories that connected present experiences to the accumulated wisdom of previous generations. The sounds of the town at night were different from those of day, softer and more intimate. The gentle conversations of neighbors meeting at their gates, the distant music from a celebration, the rhythmic sounds of night workers go about their tasks. The temple bells that marked the passing hours served not merely as timepieces, but as reminders of the larger rhythms that govern human life. The cycles of sleeping and waking, working and resting, solitude, and community that gave structure to experience. Their bronze voices carried across the tile roofs and narrow streets, calling people to awareness of the present moment, to gratitude for the day's gifts, to preparation for the rest that would restore them for tomorrow's opportunities and challenges. The hush of the garden gate opens onto the recognition that these communities represented successful experiments in cooperative living, places where individual ambition was balanced by collective responsibility, where competition was tempered by mutual respect, where the practical necessities of daily life were elevated through attention to beauty, ceremony, and the cultivation of virtues that made social life both possible and rewarding. In these towns, the ideals of bushidō found expression not only in the formal behavior of the warrior class, but in the daily interactions of merchants, craftsmen, and ordinary citizens who understood that honor was not the exclusive possession of any single group, but a quality that could be cultivated and expressed by anyone willing to live according to principles of honesty, service, and mutual respect. The great highways that connected distant regions of Japan were more than mere transportation routes. They were rivers of human movement that carried ideas, goods, customs, and dreams across mountains and valleys, linking isolated communities to the larger currents of national life. The most famous of these, the Bushidō, stretched like a carefully tended garden path from the imperial capital to the seat of military government. Its 53 stations providing not merely rest and refreshment for travelers, but windows into the infinite variety of human experience. Each way station along these highways developed its own character, its own specialties and attractions that drew travelers to linger longer than mere necessity required. Some were famous for particular foods, delicacies that could be obtained nowhere else, prepared according to secret recipes that had been perfected over generations. Others were known for their hot springs, their temples, their craftsmen, or simply for the exceptional hospitality of their innkeepers, who understood that the care of strangers was both a practical business and a sacred obligation. The inns themselves were marvels of efficient organization, designed to accommodate large numbers of travelers while maintaining the intimate atmosphere that made each guest feel personally welcomed. The proprietors and their staff had developed systems for quickly assessing the needs and preferences of new arrivals, for providing appropriate accommodations regardless of budget or social status, for creating environments where people from different regions and walks of life could interact comfortably despite their differences. The evening meals served at these establishments were opportunities for travelers to sample regional specialties, to experience the subtle variations in preparation and presentation that reflected local tastes and available ingredients. The conversations that arose over these shared meals often continued late into the night, with merchants sharing information about market conditions, pilgrims describing the temples and shrines they had visited, officials discussing the challenges of governance, and ordinary citizens exchanging stories about their families, their work, and their hopes for the future. The roads themselves required constant maintenance, with local communities taking responsibility for the sections that passed through their territories. This work was not merely practical, but ceremonial, understood as a form of service to the travelers who depended upon safe and comfortable passage, an expression of the fundamental human obligation to assist others in their journeys. The sweeping of paths, the repair of bridges, the clearing of fallen branches were all performed with the same care and attention that might be devoted to the maintenance of a temple or shrine. The palanquin bearers who carried passengers unable or unwilling to walk developed their own traditions and codes of conduct, their own techniques for maintaining steady, comfortable movement over long distances and difficult terrain. They took pride in their ability to provide smooth transportation regardless of weather conditions or the quality of the road surface, understanding that their passengers' comfort and safety were sacred trusts that required not only physical strength, but also careful attention to every detail of their service. The merchants who traveled these roads formed informal networks of mutual assistance, sharing information about bandits or dangerous weather conditions, offering aid to colleagues who encountered difficulties, maintaining the reputation for honesty and reliability that made long-distance commerce possible. Their pack animals were cared for with the same attention given to valuable cargo, understood as partners in enterprise rather than mere tools, deserving of rest, proper food, and protection from harm. The pilgrims who walked these paths in fulfillment of religious vows brought their own atmosphere of dedication and spiritual purpose to the highways, their presence serving as a reminder that travel could be undertaken for reasons that transcended material gain or political necessity. Their prayers enchanted. Sutras provided a soundtrack for the journey that connected all travelers, regardless of their individual destinations or motivations, to the larger purposes that gave meaning to human movement and striving. The seasonal changes that transformed the landscape along these routes provided constantly shifting backdrops to the human dramas that unfolded daily on the highways. Spring brought cherry blossoms that turned ordinary rest stops into scenes of extraordinary beauty, drawing travelers to pause and compose verses celebrating the transient perfection they witnessed. Summer offered opportunities to experience regional festivals, to participate in celebrations that revealed the unique character and traditions of each locality. The autumn colors that painted the mountains in shades of fire created natural galleries where travelers could appreciate the aesthetic gifts that nature provided freely to all who took the time to observe and appreciate them. Winter brought its own challenges and rewards, testing the endurance and resourcefulness of those who braved the cold, but also offering experiences of stark beauty that could be found in no other season. The friendships formed along these roads often lasted for decades, maintained through correspondence, and renewed during subsequent journeys. The shared experiences of weather, difficult terrain, unexpected delays, and moments of transcendent beauty created bonds that transcended the usual categories of social distinction, uniting people who might never have met under ordinary circumstances, in common appreciation for the adventures and insights that travel made possible. The hush of the Garden Gate opens onto the understanding that these highways were more than systems of transportation. They were schools where people learn about the diversity and unity of human experience, places where the ideals of hospitality, cooperation, and mutual assistance were not merely theoretical principles but practical necessities that made civilized travel possible. In the daily interactions between travelers and innkeepers, merchants and pilgrims, palanquin bearers and their passengers, the fundamental virtues of bushidō found expression in countless acts of courtesy, service, and shared humanity that enriched the lives of all who participated in this great circulation of people, goods, and ideas across the landscape of Japan. The transformation of Japan from a collection of competing feudal domains into a unified modern nation represented not the abandonment of traditional values, but their evolution into forms appropriate to new circumstances and challenges. The samurai who witnessed these changes understood that their essential mission remained unchanged even as the external conditions of their service were revolutionized by contact with Western technology, ideas, and forms of social organization. The opening of the country to foreign influence brought new opportunities for learning and growth, but also new responsibilities for preserving what was most valuable in the accumulated wisdom of previous generations. The samurai who adapted most successfully to these changes were those who understood that bushidō was not a rigid set of rules appropriate only to feudal conditions, but a flexible approach to life that could guide ethical behavior in any era or social system. The development of modern industries, transportation systems, and educational institutions required the same virtues that had always been central to the warrior's code: careful planning, persistent effort, willingness to learn from failure, loyalty to worthy goals, and service to the larger community. The samurai, who became successful entrepreneurs, educators, and government officials, brought to their new roles the same dedication to excellence and ethical behavior that had characterized the best of their ancestors. The preservation of traditional arts and crafts took on new importance as Japan engaged more extensively with the outside world, providing not merely tourist attractions or export products, but living connections to the aesthetic and spiritual insights that had been developed over centuries of patient cultivation. The tea ceremony, flower arrangement, calligraphy, and other traditional practices found new relevance as methods for maintaining inner balance and clarity in an increasingly complex and rapidly changing world. The gardens that had always been central to Japanese aesthetic culture continue to provide spaces for contemplation and renewal, but now served also as symbols of the nation's commitment to preserving natural beauty in the face of industrial development. The careful attention to seasonal changes, the integration of natural and artificial elements, the creation of environments that encourage reflection and spiritual growth remained as relevant to modern life as they had been to previous generations. The educational system that emerged during this period of transformation incorporated traditional values, into modern curricula, ensuring that students learn not only technical skills and factual information, but also the ethical principles and aesthetic sensibilities that would enable them to use their knowledge in service of worthy goals. The study of classical literature, history, and philosophy provided continuity with past generations while preparing students to meet the challenges of a rapidly changing world. The concept of service that had always been central to the samurai ideal found new expression in modern professions and occupations, with doctors, teachers, civil servants, and business leaders understanding their work as forms of contribution to the common good rather than merely means of personal advancement. The willingness to subordinate individual desires to larger purposes, to maintain high standards of performance regardless of external recognition or reward, to take responsibility for the welfare of those who depended upon one's services, remained as relevant in modern contexts as it had been in feudal ones. The international relationships that Japan developed during this period were guided by the same principles of honor, honesty, and mutual respect that had governed the best interactions between individuals in traditional society. The nation's representatives understood that their behavior reflected not only upon themselves but upon their entire culture, that their commitment to truthfulness and reliability would determine whether foreign partners would trust Japan as a reliable ally and trading partner. The technological innovations that transformed daily life were approached with the same spirit of careful study and patient mastery that had characterized traditional crafts, with inventors and engineers understanding that their work required not only technical knowledge, but also wisdom about the human consequences of the changes they were creating. The integration of new technologies into existing social structures required the same sensitivity to harmony and balance that had always been central to Japanese aesthetic culture. The preservation of natural beauty in the face of industrial development required the same long-term thinking and willingness to sacrifice immediate gain for future benefit that had always characterized the best of Japanese leadership. The understanding that human beings were part of a larger natural system that deserved respect and protection continued to influence policy decisions and individual choices, ensuring that progress would not come at the expense of the environmental heritage that had shaped Japanese culture for millennia. The hush of the Garden Gate opens onto the recognition that the essential spirit of bushidō never disappeared but continued to manifest in new forms appropriate to changing circumstances, providing guidance and inspiration for each generation as it faced the particular challenges and opportunities of its own era. The quiet virtues of honesty, service, dedication to excellence, and respect for others remained as relevant to modern life as they had been to the warriors who first articulated these principles, offering a foundation for ethical behavior that transcended the specific forms of social organization within which it was practiced. In these gentle hours when daylight fades into the soft embrace of evening, we reach the end of our journey through the quiet landscape of honor and service that the samurai cultivated across the centuries. Like travelers who have walked a mountain path from dawn to dusk, we pause now at the final way station, grateful for all we have discovered, ready to carry these gifts of wisdom into the peaceful realm of sleep. The lessons we have gathered along this path were never meant to burden us with impossible expectations or rigid rules, but to offer gentle guidance for the cultivation of our own inner gardens. In the patient attention to small details, in the willingness to serve purposes larger than our immediate desires, in the appreciation of beauty, wherever it might be found, we discover that the way of bushidō was always an invitation to live more fully, more consciously, more generously than we might have thought possible. The hush of the garden gate closes behind us now, but its peace remains, settling around us like a perfectly fitted garment, warming us with the accumulated wisdom of generations who understood that true strength was often expressed through gentleness, that real courage might with a face of patience, that the greatest victories were won not through force, but through the steady practice of virtue in all the small moments that make up a human life. As sleep approaches with its gift of rest and renewal, we carry with us the understanding that every day offers fresh opportunities to embody these timeless principles, to contribute our own small verses to the great poem of existence, to find in our ordinary activities the same potential for meaning and beauty that transform the simple gestures of daily life into expressions of the sacred. The path continues, quiet and sure, through all our dreams and into whatever tomorrow may bring.